Sean, let's start the conference by giving everyone a recap of your cross-country and indoor track seasons. And then also your competition for your outdoor track season was scheduled to begin on March 21st at Milan Park, and update the group on where you were in your outdoor season when the news broke on March 13th about the season being canceled.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And everybody for being on this call. We appreciate your time. So I guess in reflection on the year, if we were to go back to the beginning of cross-country season back in August, we sat at Canaan Valley where we go to a preseason cross-country camp. And, for the first time in a long time in this program, in a number of years anyways, I truly believed we had a shot at winning the Big 12 cross-country meet. And, in terms of the girls in the program at this point, and they've been with us 3 and 4 years at this point, realistically, while I think all sports hope to win and plan to win, I think our sport's a touch different. There's not a lot of miracles that happen on race day. It's basically a pattern of what's been happening over a few years and certainly a few months prior to it. So we sat there and discussed it, and I had a relatively young team, a lot of walk-on kids that were contributing to the program, and it immediately set the tone for the season. And I guess if you were to flash forward, the next 10 or 12 weeks into October, November, we came within probably 5 seconds of winning the Big 12 cross-country meet. If they, we took a score 5 seconds from the finish line, our girls, we would have won it. They announced that we won it on the live results, or speculated that we did. So, all in all, I think, we lost it in the last second, but I think it was, a tremendous step forward back again for our program. These kids were brought in 4 and 5 years ago, 3 and 4 years ago, into a tradition in the 4 or 5 years prior to, where they expect to be at nationals. They believe this is a program that should be at nationals, and my God, they got close. So I walked away from that meet, and I actually felt like it was probably one of the very, very best seasons that the program has ever had, regardless of winning or not winning. So I was very, very pleased with what the young ladies did. It's interesting. We have a fairly high percentage of kids locally in this program, certainly from across the state and locally. We've always tried to do that and always will. So to do it with kids out of West Virginia is to me outstanding. They carry a 3.6 GPA. They are just tremendous kids. Moving into the winter months, I think basically, if I were to touch on some of the highlights with the winter, we had numerous kids, numerous young ladies in the program, student athletes that moved into the all-time top 5 in our program all-time lists, and some of those names: Seda Wright, Gilmer County, Peter Gay also moved in the long jump. Maisha moved into the top 5 in the triple jump, and probably the most outstanding athlete for us this winter, Haley Jackson, moved into the mile all-time top 5, which the events that I just told you about, we've had numerous All-Americans in those events. And, as we looked ahead to the outdoor track season, that's probably what's most disappointing for that group of young ladies, is that many kids within the program were finally going to get into their specialties. Theta is her primary event is the discus. It's only thrown outdoors. We have 4 extremely strong steeplechasers. The steeplechase did not run indoors, so we were excited about that. The 10K last year, we had girls two garner all Big 12 awards that were back for the 10K outdoors. So leading off of what Brian said there, when we found this out, I'll tell you, it was something else. We've been reading about it. We've probably spoken to a lot of coaches, on all the sports across the spectrum. Once the NBA went down, it was just a trickle effect. And I will say this though: the day after that Thursday, we called a team meeting, and I couldn't have been prouder. I think that the room was sad. The room was frustrated. It was angry. It was sad. Ultimately, those student athletes that I'm fortunate enough to be a head coach for understood the magnitude of what we're experiencing, and quite honestly, I haven't heard any real whining out of them. They're a pretty special group. They understand that the world and the world's health is at stake here, and I'm extremely proud.
All right, Coach, we're all going to take some questions here. First one comes from Greg Hunter. Go ahead, Greg.
So, Coach, obviously seniors are going to be allowed to return next season. I'm not certainly how many you had on your roster, but have you talked to them about that? That's sort of the general question. How many of your seniors will come back?
Hi, Greg. Yeah, I've got actually, which was exciting for our future was we don't have many seniors. Certainly not in a situation to come back. We do have two. Candace Jones, Candace Jones was married last summer. She's Candace Archer now. Candace is one of our very best milers. She was an incredible breakthrough for us last cross country season, and she had already made plans and was leaving town to go run in a professional running group somewhere in the country. She wasn't sure where, so her plans were that she wanted to do it. But long story short, she's decided to stay, and we'll use her last year of eligibility. And another young lady we have out of Tays Valley, West Virginia, Olivia Hill, is undecided. Olivia is pre-med, and she has numerous options in front of her, one of which that she's strongly considering is coming back to utilize that last year of eligibility. Olivia's qualified for a couple of NCAA championships in the 10K, was one of my leaders, one of my captains this past year, and she's got some thinking to do, whether she can defer med school, whether she'll reapply to med schools and try to get into maybe what would have been her first choice. I would say the odds of Olivia coming back are probably 50-50. But Candace jumped at it, and if she feels that's best for her future, then that's exciting to us.
All right, go ahead, John Antonik.
Hey, Sean, I know you don't have a roster size as big as football, but you've got a pretty big roster for track, and you've got a lot of girls spread around the world, Kenya, Australia, Canada, so forth. How have you been able to keep up with them, and have you been able to keep up with them?
Yeah, John, good question. Within our sport, within track, like many sports, we've got event groups. So I've got some assistant coaches that directly daily coach what we would call their group within our group. And I would say that the communication between our coaching staff and the student athletes in the program, I know for me personally is daily. At the very most, it doesn't go more than 2 days without chatting, just a few words. And for my coaches, I am assuming it's similar. I know personally I've reached out to each and every one of them. They're doing well. I think everybody's concern is how are they going to adjust to online classes. I think some are made for it, and others it's terrible. So I think the fact that the whole world is doing it makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, we communicate WhatsApp, we instant messenger, things like that. We've got GroupMe. They've got subgroups going on, trying to keep themselves motivated, and I mean more so motivated in school, and just to make sure that in another month they can reset the button and basically say, okay, well, this was to be our summer, and now we can kind of think about life a little differently.
All right, go ahead, Kevin Kinder.
Coach, other than like your relays, a lot of track is individual, sport, a lot of individual practice, a lot of alone time work. Does that help them, do you think, maybe cope with this a little bit better, that they're self-motivated, self-directed in that way?
I think that's a great question. One of the reminders that our staff constantly gives our kids is that our off seasons are very different than most. Our conditioning phase is actually specific conditioning to our sport. If you're talking about being a runner, when you take a look at a thrower, a stereotype of a thrower is that they're usually alone. They're out in a field somewhere throwing implements, and they many times throw at track meets outside the stadium. They're used to the seclusion and the isolation, and quite honestly being alone. And I think that the toughest event areas for us might be this very specific and technical track events, the jumps and the pole vault. So we have some very, very good jumpers and some very strong pole vaulters. For them, they've found running, and they're out running. And I live over by the rail trail. That thing has exploded in the last few weeks. Obviously, we're preaching, tiny little groups. Go solo. Go with your one friend. Run single file. Do the things that we're supposed to be doing, in accordance to this distancing. But I think it does make it a little bit easier. So the flip side is when you're not able to perform, you're kind of thinking like an individual. So it's hurtful. So you don't have 10 or 12 in a room and all trying to motivate each other to try to get things going again. But they've woken up probably the next day, a few days later, and then they've kind of gotten back to work within the parameters that we're allowed to have them working. So they've kind of trained their whole lives to be individuals, and I think at this point it's up to them to continue forward and make sure that when everybody gets the green light, that they're at least in respectable shape to get back to work.
Go ahead and take another question from John.
Yeah, a follow up to what I asked before. How many of your girls are on campus right now, and how many are there any concerns with some of your athletes that are out of the country getting back in if they're not here?
Well, I'll tell you, I had a text this morning. It's hard to communicate with the girls over in Australia just because of the time change. So we're figuring that out. But one of my young ladies there, she was staying in town. She was trying to stay in her routine, go to school. Just basically hope that the travel bans and things like that were lifted at some point in the summer. She could go home and visit her family for a month. But she and I chatted about it and felt it might be best for her to go be with her family. And as soon as she got off the plane, she was under the quarantine for 2 weeks, which ends, as a matter of fact, ends today. And so yesterday afternoon, the police came by her home to ask her a series of questions to ensure that she was ready to get back into the real world over there in Australia, which I thought was quite interesting. But I think our kids got out soon enough where they're back with their loved ones. And to be honest, of the countries that we currently have on our roster, America right now is the one that's supposed to be going through the next, with the next few weeks being it's high peak. So to be honest, I think the Australians are on the back end of that, and the Canadians are with their families, and they're very similar to the American pattern. We have one young lady from British Columbia, Canada, that like California and Washington and British Columbia right above it, have just been decimated, and that was the only young lady in our program that I actually felt should stay in Morgantown, and she did so she's here, just trying to take care of business.
I think we lost you on video, but we'll go ahead and take another question from Sean Manning.
Okay. Yeah, someone's beeping in on me here. It'll come back.
Okay. Okay, John.
Hey, Coach, you had mentioned some of the local distance runners you have. I was kind of wondering just how they had developed, Sarah Wills, Amber Dombrowski, Sam Hatcher, and Peyton Kokura.
How they've developed. Well, I'd say starting with the first one you said there, Sarah Wells has actually become one of my captains here in the program. She's a big cheerleader for the program, and certainly as an athlete has run inside our top 5 in big cross country meets and been a very strong contributor. I would say of the local girls, she's probably, from the moment that she walked in until today, has probably improved, I would say, the most. Of course, the other ones are a lot younger. Samantha Hatcher, she qualified for the Big 12 championships indoors and set a lifetime best in the indoor 3K, which 3K 2 mile. What a joy to coach. These kids from Morgantown, they already know how to work hard. They're very, very well coached in high school, and they understand and love running. And by the time we get them, it's basically just kind of a continuation of what they've already been doing for 3 or 4 years. So we will continue to do it. I could see somebody like Peyton turning into a captain over the next couple of years also. She may not be my best runner, but she certainly has qualities that any coach would want in leadership positions within the program. So we'll keep doing it.
Reminder, if you have any questions, please use the raise hand feature. The next question is from Greg Hunter.
So, Coach, unfortunately, you didn't get to use your new track complex much this spring, but just overall, what has that meant in, I guess, year and a half since that opened?
Yeah, it's so our first meet was a year ago, late March. We had a rough winter a year ago in terms of being able to be outside and train. Our first real workouts last April. I'll tell you the biggest thing it was a major boost of morale for the group to be able to get out there and have a track and have various event areas training at the exact same time. Is the first time we've had in years. You know, unfortunately, that outdoor track really wasn't safe anymore for the pole vault and a few other events. So you had a couple girls training indoors, and you had others training on the rail trail, and just to have a group around each other was just a big pump up for the group. We go out there and we turn some music on, and they work really, really hard on what I would consider to be an incredible facility. It's helped recruiting, as I've certainly helped recruiting a little bit this year. And again, unfortunately, the vast majority of our recruiting is done from March on. In outdoor track season, these seniors are still, well, they hope to have had a high school senior, track season. So you never know, they might still, but so we were kind of cut off at the knees in terms of when the majority of our recruiting is done. We go sit and watch high school meets and are able to sit with coaches and meet families and things like that. So we didn't really get that benefit this year with the track, but we have great social media here at the university, and our sports information have created a portfolio of pictures and ourselves also that we can send out, and kids can get a good impression. Yeah, it'll change the community. It'll help everybody, and certainly will help West Virginia.
All right, John, go ahead.
I'm on a hot streak here, Sean. I got all kinds of questions for you.
Keep going.
Yeah, well, just curious. I know the conference has instituted specific rules for training right now for some sports. What can you do right now in track and cross country? And I would assume in your sport, because there's distancing, I guess, involved specifically in running, that you can do a lot of the things that you would normally do just because that's the way the sport's landed. Go through that with me a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, we can. So what is not allowed is for us to take a local pole vaulter and go to the track and practice the vault with them. Okay, we cannot do that. But what we can do is send out conditioning programs, running programs, strength and conditioning. You know, the department's done a wonderful job over the last week or two putting together care packages for these kids with specifics like for us as distance runners, iron supplements and stretching bands and things like that. And so they're able to do things at home. They're able to, we've got, so for strength and conditioning, we have, my strength coach, Jared, has created a three-tier system of what you have available. For some that might have a home gym, this is what you'll do. For others that have access to little dumbbells and little, some weights, this is what we want you to do. And we're going to send them bands. And the third would just be body weight type exercises, strength and conditioning wise. So they're in pretty good spot that way. With regards to just being able to get out and run, it's tricky because you don't want to tell them. We've got, someone asked me earlier, we probably have 10 girls that are still in Morgantown and 10 runners that are still in Morgantown. And you don't want to tell them, okay, I think you should all get together and go for a run. I mean, to me, it's irresponsible to do that. So what they've done is they've paired off and they've either gone single or they've gone in pairs. And quite honestly, the 10 girls in town, probably little subgroups of 1 or 2 or 3 have seen each other, but it's not gone into the whole group. They've been pretty responsible with that, and quite responsible actually. So, life as a distance runner hasn't changed a lot. I'm permitted to facilitate training for 5 days a week. So I've chosen the 5 days that I'm going to say this is what I believe you should be doing. And to be honest with you, I'm assuming that the kids are falling into line with what their basic patterns are. Those girls want to run. My job for 90% of the team is not to push them. It's actually to hold them back when maybe they're doing a little bit too much. So I think they're in a good spot. Over the last week, 6 or 7 days, I've spoken to all the vaulters, and they become runners. They're out running and trying to stay in shape that way. They can do slight exercises on their own to stay sharp and have a little bit of speed. But tracks around the country for the most part have been shut down. So really, they're just out on the roads and down on the trails. And here in West Virginia, still very much permitted, and at this point, I would say encouraged to be out exercising responsibly. So as long as that mandate is still in place, we'll continue to do it.
Go ahead and get a follow-up from John.
Last one from me, Sean, on this. How long do you think it would take? Let's say this, I guess this is speculative a little bit, but how much training do you need to get a season started?
To be honest, so season number 1 coming up would be cross country. And I think at a fictitious date, I think, to be honest with you, if the date was lifted in August, I think we could be ready by September. And I would say the reason we would be is because on their own, they're going to make sure they'd be ready. And I have that much faith in the group that I have. Again, the primary, component to distance running is aerobic conditioning. And at this point, they're still permitted to be outside. So I don't really think it affects us that much, John. And I think with regards to the track team, they're also in a pretty good spot because it's the worst thing that they can do all spring and summer is run and lift whatever they have available to them. They have all fall to get ready for track season. So, more along the lines of a winter sport. So while we utilize that time late summer and fall, I really don't see a scenario unless this were to be pushed into the new year where we wouldn't and couldn't be ready for season.
Go ahead and take a question from Greg Hunter. If this is the last question, then we'll finish up with Brian Messerly. So if you have any more, send them in. But go ahead, Greg.
So, Sean, not to say you're old, but you've been around long enough to have seen West Virginia in a couple of conferences. So,
I have.
Yeah, just compare what the Big 12. I mean, Texas Tech, obviously are very good. What's life in this league been like compared to past ones?
I think the Big 12. I think in the Big East, West Virginia being a women's only team, we fit into the Big East at that point very well because I think everybody had little scars against them. This guy had a track, this one didn't. This one was fully funded, this wasn't. Fully scholarship, not. There was a lot more parity in terms of what was accessible to them. I think our administration currently have under the parameters of the NCAA have given us every opportunity financially to succeed. And I think just the fundamental difference is that track within the athletic departments in the Big 12 is a much higher priority than it was in the Big East, if that makes sense. Cross country in the Big East within the various universities was a premier sport. I would say track was a little lower on the totem pole. I would say in the Big 12, it's one of the higher priority sports, and I think with that means you've just got a few more resources. This track that we built a year ago or helped to build a year ago will go a long way to helping bring that parity up. And we know this. I work for a senior staff that understands and is doing their very best to try to help us with this situation and with these situations. Anybody that walks into that shell building understands what it is. And that said, for 20 years we were we were the envy of most of the Big East teams. We had an indoor track. We had something most of them didn't have. So it's just getting older, and that the plans that Shane's put into place, we'll fix that in time. I mean, I'm probably expecting a little bit of a setback in terms of time now with regards to some of the things that we might require, but overall, I absolutely have full faith in the people I work for that we're going to address them. I think one of the big pluses that the Big 12 has that the Big East didn't, so I just mentioned we had a track, is just weather. A lot of the schools, a lot of the states that they belong to are sprint powerhouse states. They're throwing powerhouse states, and they have warm weather. They're training outdoors 12 months of the year. We walk into the Big 12 indoor meet, and we are pasty white, and my peers, for the most part, are suntanned. So it's just a different world, and I think, at this point with these parameters, it's why I love track. I love all the events in track and field, but it makes a little more sense to have a little more emphasis in distance running, because I think that's our climate and that's our geographical region, and I think that's where our resources are probably best spent.